The air was crisp, and the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the quiet lake. The man walked slowly along the shore, his boots crunching against the gravel. He came here often, ever since he retired. The lake was his escape, a place where he could forget the weight of his past. But today, something was different. A strange sound broke the silence, a guttural cry, like nothing he had ever heard before. It was desperate, almost human, but not quite. He froze, his eyes scanning the water. At first, he saw nothing. Then, a ripple. A splash. And there, in the middle of the lake, something was struggling. His heart raced as he squinted, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. It was an animal, but unlike any he had ever encountered. Its fur was a shimmering silver, dotted with black spots that seemed to shift and move like shadows. Its eyes glowed faintly, a piercing green that cut through the dim light. It was drowning. Without thinking, the man kicked off his boots and plunged into the icy water. The cold hit him like a shock, but he pushed through, his strong arms cutting through the waves. The creature thrashed wildly, its claws slashing at the water. It was scared, maybe even more scared than he was. "Hold on," he shouted, though he wasn't sure if it could understand him. He reached out, grabbing hold of the creature's fur. It was softer than he expected, almost like silk. The animal turned its head, locking eyes with him. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. There was intelligence in those eyes, a depth that sent a shiver down his spine. The creature stopped struggling, as if it realized he was there to help. With all his strength, the man pulled it toward the shore. The water fought him every step of the way, the current tugging at his legs. His muscles burned, but he refused to let go. Finally, they reached the shallows, and he dragged the creature onto the gravel. It lay there, panting, its sides heaving. The man knelt beside it, his own breath coming in ragged gasps. Up close, he could see the creature's injuries, deep gashes along its side, as if it had been in a fight. Its fur was matted with blood and water, but it still shimmered faintly in the fading light. "What are you?" he whispered, more to himself than to the creature. It tilted its head, watching him with those glowing green eyes. Then, it let out a low growl, not threatening, but urgent. Its gaze shifted to something behind him. The man turned, following its line of sight. There, half buried in the gravel, was a small, glowing orb. It pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat, casting a soft blue light. He reached for it, his fingers brushing against its smooth surface. It was warm to the touch, and as he held it, he felt a strange sensation, like a hum resonating through his bones. The creature growled again, louder this time. The man looked back, and his blood ran cold. The alien leopard, because that's what it was, he realized now, was staring at him with an intensity that made his stomach churn. Its eyes seemed to bore into his soul, as if warning him. But warning him of what? He stood slowly, the orb clutched tightly in his hand. The leopard struggled to its feet, its movements stiff and pained. It took a step toward him, then another, until it was close enough to nudge his leg with its head. The gesture was surprisingly gentle, almost affectionate. "You were protecting this, weren't you?" he said, holding up the orb. The leopard let out a soft growl, as if in agreement. But before he could say more, the orb's glow intensified, bathing the shore in a blinding light. The man shielded his eyes, his heart pounding in his chest. When the light faded, the leopard was gone. He looked around, but there was no sign of it. Only the orb remained, still warm in his hand. He stared at it, his mind racing. What had he just stumbled into? And why did he feel like his life was about to change forever? The man stood on the shore, staring at the orb in his hand. Its glow had dimmed, but it still pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. He turned it over, examining the strange symbols etched into its surface. They were unlike anything he had ever seen, curved lines and sharp angles that seemed to shift and change as he looked at them. The wind picked up, rustling the trees around the lake. He shivered, suddenly aware of how cold and wet he was. His clothes clung to his skin, and his muscles ached from the effort of pulling the alien leopard from the water. But he couldn't bring himself to leave. Not yet. He glanced around, half expecting the leopard to reappear. But the shore was empty, the only sound the gentle lapping of the waves. The creature was gone, leaving him with more questions than answers. What was it? Where had it come from? And why had it been guarding this orb? The man sighed and tucked the orb into his jacket pocket. It felt heavier than it looked, as if it carried the weight of something far greater than its size. He turned and began the long walk back to his cabin, his mind racing. The cabin was small and modest, nestled in the woods a mile from the lake. It had been his home for the past 5 years, ever since he left the city. He had come here to escape, to forget. But now, as he stepped inside and closed the door behind him, he felt a strange sense of anticipation. Like something was about to happen. He lit a fire in the hearth, the warmth a welcome relief after the cold of the lake. As the flames crackled and grew, he sat down in his old armchair and pulled the orb from his pocket. It glowed softly in the dim light, casting shadows on the walls. The man leaned back, staring at the orb. His thoughts drifted to the past, to the life he had left behind. He had been a firefighter once, a hero in the eyes of many. But that was before the accident. Before he lost everything. It had been a routine call, a house fire in the middle of the night. He had rushed in without hesitation, as he always did. But this time, the flames had been too fierce, the smoke too thick. He had barely made it out alive. His family hadn't been so lucky. The guilt had consumed him, eating away at him until there was nothing left. He had quit his job, left the city, and come here to this remote corner of the world. He had thought he could outrun the pain, but it had followed him, a constant shadow. Now, as he held the orb in his hand, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years, hope. It was faint, barely there, but it was enough to make his chest tighten. This orb, this strange, glowing object, was a mystery. And mysteries had answers. He stood and walked to the small desk in the corner of the room. It was cluttered with books and papers, the remnants of a life he had tried to leave behind. He cleared a space and set the orb down, then pulled out a magnifying glass from one of the drawers. The symbols on the orb were even more intricate up close. They seemed to form patterns, like a language or a code. He traced them with his finger, feeling the faint hum of energy beneath his touch. It was mesmerizing, almost hypnotic. As he studied the orb, a memory surfaced, a story he had heard long ago, about ancient civilizations and their connection to the stars. He had always dismissed it as fantasy, but now, he wasn't so sure. Could this orb be proof of something greater? Something beyond human understanding? The orb's glow intensified suddenly, snapping him out of his thoughts. He stepped back, his heart pounding. The symbols on its surface began to shift, rearranging themselves into new patterns. The hum grew louder, filling the room. Then, without warning, the orb projected a beam of light into the air. The man stumbled back, his eyes wide with shock. The light formed an image, a map, with a glowing dot marking a location deep in the mountains. The man's breath caught in his throat. The map was detailed, showing a path through the forest and into the heart of the wilderness. The glowing dot pulsed, as if urging him to follow. He glanced at the orb, then back at the map. His mind raced. This was no coincidence. The leopard, the orb, the map, it was all connected. And somehow, he had become a part of it. The man grabbed his backpack and began stuffing it with supplies, food, water, a flashlight, a knife. He didn't know what he would find, but he knew he had to go. This was his chance to find answers, to make sense of the chaos that had consumed his life. As he stepped outside, the orb's glow dimmed, and the map disappeared. But the image was burned into his mind. He knew where he had to go. The forest was dark and quiet as he set off, the orb tucked safely in his pocket. The air was thick with the scent of pine, and the only sound was the crunch of leaves under his boots. He felt a strange sense of calm, as if he was exactly where he was meant to be. But as he walked deeper into the woods, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The shadows seemed to move, and the trees whispered secrets he couldn't understand. He gripped the strap of his backpack tighter, his heart pounding in his chest. The journey had begun. And whatever lay ahead, he knew it would change him forever. The forest was alive with sounds, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a bird, the soft crunch of the man's boots on the damp earth. He walked steadily, following the path he had seen on the map. The orb in his pocket pulsed faintly, a constant reminder of the mystery he was chasing. The further he went, the denser the forest became. The trees towered above him, their branches intertwining to form a canopy that blocked out most of the sunlight. The air was cool and damp, carrying the earthy scent of moss and decaying leaves. It was a place untouched by time, wild and untamed. The man paused for a moment, catching his breath. He pulled the orb from his pocket and held it up, hoping it might give him some clue. But it remained unchanged, its glow steady and faint. He sighed and tucked it back into his pocket, feeling a flicker of frustration. What was he even looking for? And why had he been chosen for this? As if in response, a low growl echoed through the trees. The man froze, his hand instinctively reaching for the knife at his belt. He turned slowly, scanning the shadows. The growl came again, closer this time. And then, stepping into a patch of sunlight, was the alien leopard. The man's breath caught in his throat. The creature was even more magnificent up close, its silver fur shimmering like liquid metal. Its green eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, they just stared at each other. Then, the leopard let out a soft growl and took a step forward. "You're back," the man said, his voice barely above a whisper. He wasn't sure if the creature could understand him, but it felt right to speak. "I thought you were gone." The leopard tilted its head, as if considering his words. Then it turned and began walking deeper into the forest, glancing back at him as if to say, "Follow me." The man hesitated for only a moment before falling into step behind the leopard. It moved with a grace that was almost hypnotic, its paws making no sound on the forest floor. The man struggled to keep up, his boots crunching loudly in comparison. As they walked, the forest began to change. The trees grew taller, their trunks thicker and more twisted. The air grew colder, and a faint mist began to rise from the ground. The man shivered, pulling his jacket tighter around him. He glanced at the leopard, but it showed no sign of discomfort, its movements as fluid as ever. After what felt like hours, they reached a clearing. In the center was a large, flat rock, covered in moss. The leopard walked up to it and sat down, its eyes fixed on the man. He approached cautiously, unsure of what to expect. The orb in his pocket began to glow brighter, its hum growing louder. He pulled it out and held it up, watching as the symbols on its surface shifted and changed. The leopard let out a soft growl, its gaze never leaving the orb. Suddenly, the ground beneath them began to tremble. The man stumbled, barely keeping his balance. The mist thickened, swirling around them like a living thing. The orb's glow intensified, casting an eerie light over the clearing. And then, the rock began to move. The man stared in disbelief as the rock shifted, revealing a hidden passageway beneath it. The leopard stood and walked to the edge, looking down into the darkness. It turned to the man and growled, as if urging him to follow. The man hesitated. The passageway was dark and foreboding, the air that wafted up from it cold and damp. But the orb's glow was steady, and the leopard's gaze was unwavering. He took a deep breath and stepped forward. The passageway was narrow, the walls slick with moisture. The man pulled out his flashlight and turned it on, the beam cutting through the darkness. The leopard walked ahead, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark. The man followed, his heart pounding in his chest. As they descended, the air grew colder, and the walls seemed to close in around them. The man's breath came in short, shallow gasps, his nerves on edge. But the leopard moved with confidence, its steps sure and steady. After what felt like an eternity, they reached the bottom. The passageway opened up into a large cavern, its walls lined with strange, glowing crystals. The light they emitted was soft and blue, casting an otherworldly glow over the space. In the center of the cavern was a pedestal, and on it rested another orb, identical to the one the man carried. The leopard walked up to it and sat down, its gaze fixed on the man. He approached slowly, his eyes wide with wonder. The orb on the pedestal pulsed faintly, its glow in sync with the one in his hand. He reached out and touched it, feeling the same hum of energy he had felt before. As his fingers brushed the orb, a vision flashed before his eyes, a starry sky, a distant planet, a civilization unlike anything he had ever seen. The images came and went in a blur, leaving him dizzy and disoriented. He stumbled back, his heart racing. The leopard let out a soft growl, its eyes filled with something that looked like sympathy. The man took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. Whatever this was, it was far bigger than he had imagined. The leopard stood and walked to the edge of the cavern, where a narrow tunnel led further into the earth. It looked back at the man, its gaze steady and unwavering. The man nodded, though he wasn't sure why. He tucked the second orb into his pocket and followed the leopard into the tunnel. The journey was far from over, and he had a feeling the hardest part was yet to come. The tunnel was narrow and winding, the walls rough and jagged. The man followed the alien leopard, his flashlight casting flickering shadows on the stone. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, and the faint hum of the orbs in his pocket seemed to grow louder with every step. The leopard moved with purpose, its glowing eyes cutting through the darkness. The man couldn't shake the feeling that the creature knew exactly where it was going, as if it had walked this path many times before. He trusted it, though he wasn't sure why. There was something about the leopard, something ancient and wise, that made him feel safe, even in this strange, underground world. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel opened up into another cavern. This one was even larger than the last, its ceiling lost in shadow. The walls were covered in intricate carvings, their lines and patterns illuminated by the soft glow of the crystals embedded in the rock. The man stepped forward, his flashlight sweeping over the carvings. They depicted scenes of an alien world, towering cities, strange creatures, and a race of beings that looked both familiar and otherworldly. Their faces were humanoid, but their features were elongated, their eyes large and expressive. They wore flowing robes and carried staffs that glowed with the same light as the orbs. The leopard walked up to one of the carvings and sat down, its gaze fixed on the man. He approached slowly, his eyes tracing the lines of the carving. It showed a group of the alien beings standing around a pedestal, their hands raised as if in prayer. Above them, a massive ship hovered in the sky, its shape sleek and futuristic. The man reached out and touched the carving, his fingers brushing against the smooth stone. As he did, the orb in his pocket pulsed, and a strange sensation washed over him. It was as if the carving was speaking to him, telling him a story. He closed his eyes, letting the images fill his mind. He saw the alien race, peaceful and advanced, their civilization thriving on a planet far from Earth. But then, he saw darkness, a great cataclysm that threatened to destroy everything they had built. In their desperation, they had sent out guardians, creatures like the leopard, to protect their most precious secrets. The man opened his eyes, his heart pounding. The leopard was still watching him, its gaze steady and knowing. He looked at the carving again, his mind racing. Was this what the leopard was protecting? Was this why it had led him here? The orb in his pocket pulsed again, and the man pulled it out. The symbols on its surface were glowing brighter now, shifting and changing as if in response to the carvings. He held it up, watching as the light it cast illuminated more of the cavern. In the center of the room was another pedestal, this one larger and more ornate than the last. The man walked up to it, the leopard following close behind. On the pedestal was a third orb, its surface covered in the same intricate symbols. But this one was different, it was larger, and its glow was more intense. The man reached out, his fingers trembling as they brushed against the orb. As soon as he touched it, a surge of energy shot through him, and his vision blurred. He saw flashes of light, images of stars and planets, and a voice, deep and resonant, speaking in a language he couldn't understand. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the vision ended. The man stumbled back, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The leopard let out a soft growl, its eyes filled with concern. What was that?" the man whispered, his voice shaking. He looked at the orb, its glow now steady and calm. It felt heavier in his hand, as if it carried the weight of the entire universe. The leopard walked up to him and nudged his leg, its gaze steady and reassuring. The man took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. Whatever this orb was, it was connected to the carvings, and to the leopard. It was a key to something far greater than he could imagine. He looked around the cavern, his eyes tracing the lines of the carvings. They told a story of a civilization that had faced destruction and fought to survive. A story of guardians and secrets, of hope and despair. And now, he was a part of that story. The man tucked the third orb into his pocket, feeling the weight of it against his side. The leopard let out a soft growl and began walking toward the far end of the cavern, where a narrow passageway led deeper into the earth. The man followed, his mind racing with questions. What was he supposed to do with these orbs? What was the leopard protecting? And why had it chosen him? As they walked, the passageway began to widen, the walls smooth and polished. The air grew warmer, and the faint hum of the orbs grew louder. The man could feel the energy in the air, a tangible force that made his skin tingle. Finally, they reached the end of the passageway. It opened up into a massive chamber, its ceiling so high it was lost in shadow. In the center of the chamber was a massive structure, a machine of some kind, its surface covered in the same glowing symbols as the orbs. The man stepped forward, his eyes wide with awe. The machine was unlike anything he had ever seen, its design both ancient and futuristic. It hummed with energy, its surface pulsing with light. The leopard walked up to the machine and sat down, its gaze fixed on the man. He approached slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the power radiating from the machine, a force so immense it made his head spin. As he reached the machine, the orbs in his pocket began to glow brighter, their hum growing louder. He pulled them out and held them up, watching as the symbols on their surface shifted and changed. The machine responded, its surface lighting up with a brilliant glow. The machine responded, its surface lighting up with a brilliant glow. The man felt a surge of energy, and his vision blurred once again. He saw flashes of light, images of stars and planets, and the voice, deep and resonant, speaking in that strange language. Then, the vision cleared, and the man found himself standing in front of the machine, the orbs glowing brightly in his hands. The leopard let out a soft growl, its eyes filled with something that looked like pride. The man took a deep breath, his mind racing. Whatever this machine was, it was the key to everything. And now, it was up to him to unlock its secrets. The machine hummed with energy, its surface glowing brighter as the man held the orbs in his hands. He could feel their power, a steady pulse that seemed to resonate with his very soul. The alien leopard sat nearby, its glowing eyes fixed on him, as if waiting for him to make the next move. But before he could act, a noise broke the silence, a sharp, metallic clang that echoed through the chamber. The man froze, his heart skipping a beat. The leopard's ears twitched, and it let out a low growl, its body tensing. "What was that?" the man whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the machine. He turned, his flashlight sweeping across the chamber. The beam caught movement in the shadows, and his stomach dropped. Figures emerged from the darkness, men clad in black tactical gear, their faces obscured by masks. They moved with precision, their weapons trained on the man and the leopard. The man's grip tightened on the orbs, his mind racing. Who were they? And how had they found him? One of the men stepped forward, his voice cold and commanding. "Hand over the orbs, and we'll let you live." The man's heart pounded in his chest. He glanced at the leopard, which was now standing, its fur bristling. Its growl deepened, a warning to the intruders. The man took a step back, his mind racing. He couldn't let them take the orbs, not after everything he had been through. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. The leader of the group smirked, his eyes glinting behind his mask. "We're the ones who've been tracking you. You've got something that belongs to us." The man's stomach churned. These men weren't just random mercenaries, they were part of something bigger, something dangerous. He tightened his grip on the orbs, his mind racing for a way out. The leopard let out a fierce roar, its body coiled like a spring. The men hesitated, their weapons wavering for a moment. The man saw his chance. "Now," he shouted, diving to the side as the leopard lunged at the nearest mercenary. The man hit the ground hard, the orbs slipping from his hands and rolling across the floor. He scrambled to his feet, his eyes darting around the chamber. The leopard was a blur of silver and black, its claws slashing through the air. It moved with incredible speed, taking down one of the mercenaries before he could react. The man grabbed the orbs and bolted, his heart pounding in his chest. The chamber erupted into chaos. The mercenaries shouted orders, their weapons firing wildly. The man ducked behind a pillar, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He could hear the leopard's roars and the men's shouts, the sounds blending into a cacophony of noise. He peeked out from behind the pillar, his eyes scanning the room. The leopard was holding its own, but it was outnumbered. The mercenaries were closing in, their weapons trained on the creature. The man's chest tightened. He couldn't let them hurt the leopard, not after everything it had done for him. He gripped the orbs tightly, feeling their energy pulse through him. He didn't know how to use them, but he had to try. He stepped out from behind the pillar, holding the orbs high. "Hey!" he shouted, his voice echoing through the chamber. The mercenaries turned, their weapons trained on him. The leader smirked, taking a step forward. "Smart move," the leader said. "Hand them over, and we'll make this quick." The man's mind raced. He had to buy time, to think of a plan. He glanced at the leopard, which was crouched low, ready to pounce. Their eyes met, and in that moment, he felt a strange connection, a bond that went beyond words. The man took a deep breath and slammed the orbs together. The chamber was filled with a blinding light, and a shockwave of energy erupted from the orbs. The mercenaries were thrown off their feet, their weapons clattering to the ground. The man stumbled back, his vision swimming. When the light faded, the mercenaries were sprawled across the floor, groaning in pain. The leopard was unharmed, its glowing eyes fixed on the man. It let out a soft growl, as if in approval. The man's legs gave out, and he sank to the floor, his chest heaving. The orbs were still in his hands, their glow steady and calm. He looked at them, his mind racing. What had just happened? And what did it mean? The leopard walked up to him and nudged his leg, its gaze steady and reassuring. The man took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. He couldn't stay here, the mercenaries would recover soon, and more could be on the way. He stood shakily, tucking the orbs into his jacket. The leopard let out a soft growl and began walking toward a narrow passageway at the far end of the chamber. The man followed, his legs still trembling. As they walked, the passageway began to slope upward, the air growing cooler. The man could hear the faint sound of running water, and he realized they were heading toward an underground river. The leopard moved with purpose, its steps sure and steady. Finally, they reached the river. The water was dark and swift, its surface reflecting the faint glow of the orbs. The leopard walked up to the edge and looked back at the man, its gaze steady. "We're not done yet, are we?" the man asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The leopard let out a soft growl, as if in response. The man took a deep breath, his mind racing. The mercenaries were just the beginning, he could feel it. There was something bigger at play, something far more dangerous. And now, he was at the center of it. The leopard stepped into the water, its movements graceful despite the current. The man hesitated for only a moment before following, the cold water soaking through his clothes. The journey was far from over, and he had a feeling the hardest part was yet to come. The underground river was cold and swift, its dark waters pulling at the man's legs as he waded through it. The alien leopard moved ahead of him, its silver fur glinting faintly in the dim light of the orbs. The man clutched the orbs tightly, their steady hum a constant reminder of the power they held. The passageway narrowed as they moved upstream, the walls closing in around them. The sound of the mercenaries' shouts echoed faintly behind them, a reminder that they were still being pursued. The man's heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing. They needed to find a way out, fast. The leopard suddenly stopped, its ears twitching. It let out a low growl, its gaze fixed on something ahead. The man squinted, trying to see through the darkness. The river seemed to disappear into a wall of rock, but as they approached, he realized it was an illusion. The water flowed into a narrow crevice, just wide enough for them to pass through. The leopard glanced back at him, its eyes glowing faintly. It let out a soft growl, as if to say, "Follow me." Then it slipped through the crevice, its movements fluid and graceful. The man hesitated for only a moment before squeezing through after it. On the other side, the passageway opened up into a large cavern. The air was warmer here, and the walls were lined with glowing crystals, casting a soft blue light over the space. In the center of the cavern was a pool of water, its surface still and mirror-like. The man stepped forward, his eyes wide with wonder. The pool seemed to radiate energy, its surface shimmering faintly. The leopard walked up to the edge and sat down, its gaze fixed on the water. "What is this place?" the man whispered, his voice barely audible. The leopard didn't respond, but its presence was reassuring. The man knelt by the pool, his reflection staring back at him. He looked tired, his face lined with worry and exhaustion. But there was something else in his eyes, a determination that hadn't been there before. The orbs in his pocket began to glow brighter, their hum growing louder. He pulled them out and held them up, watching as the light they cast danced across the water. The symbols on their surface shifted and changed, as if responding to the energy of the pool. Suddenly, the ground beneath them began to tremble. The man stumbled, barely keeping his balance. The water in the pool rippled, and the air grew thick with tension. The leopard let out a fierce roar, its body tensing. The man turned, his heart sinking. The mercenaries had found them. They emerged from the crevice, their weapons trained on the man and the leopard. The leader stepped forward, his mask now removed, revealing a cold, calculating face. His eyes gleamed with greed as he looked at the orbs. "You've led us on quite the chase," the leader said, his voice dripping with malice. "But it's over now. Hand over the orbs, and we might let you live." The man's grip tightened on the orbs, his mind racing. He couldn't let them take the orbs, not after everything he had been through. But he was outnumbered and outgunned. He glanced at the leopard, which was crouched low, ready to pounce. The leader smirked, taking a step closer. You're not a hero. You're just a man. And men die. The man's chest tightened. He knew the leader was right, he was just a man. But he had something the mercenaries didn't. He had the leopard. And he had the orbs. The leopard let out a fierce roar and lunged at the nearest mercenary, its claws slashing through the air. The man took the opportunity to dive behind a rock, his heart pounding in his chest. The cavern erupted into chaos, the sounds of gunfire and roars echoing off the walls. The man peeked out from behind the rock, his eyes scanning the chaos. The leopard was a blur of silver and black, taking down mercenaries with incredible speed. But it was outnumbered, and the mercenaries were relentless. One of the mercenaries managed to get a shot off, hitting the leopard in the side. The creature let out a pained roar, its movements slowing. The man's chest tightened, a surge of anger and fear coursing through him. He couldn't let the leopard die, not after everything it had done for him. He stood, the orbs glowing brightly in his hands. The leader turned, his eyes widening as he saw the man. "You're making a mistake," the leader said, his voice cold. "You can't win." The man didn't respond. He slammed the orbs together, and a shockwave of energy erupted from them. The mercenaries were thrown off their feet, their weapons clattering to the ground. The leader stumbled back, his face twisted in rage. The man ran to the leopard, his heart pounding. The creature was lying on the ground, its side bleeding heavily. Its glowing eyes met his, and for a moment, they just stared at each other. Then, the leopard let out a soft growl, as if to say, "It's okay." The man's chest tightened, tears welling in his eyes. He couldn't lose the leopard, not now. He placed a hand on its side, feeling the warmth of its fur. The orbs in his other hand pulsed faintly, their energy flowing through him. The leopard's breathing slowed, its eyes closing. The man's heart broke as he realized there was nothing he could do. The creature had sacrificed itself to protect him, to protect the orbs. The leader's voice broke the silence. "You're too late. It's over." The man turned, his eyes blazing with anger. The leader was standing a few feet away, a gun trained on him. The man stood slowly, the orbs glowing brighter in his hands. "You're wrong," the man said, his voice steady. "It's not over." He slammed the orbs together again, and a blinding light filled the cavern. The leader screamed as the energy washed over him, throwing him to the ground. The man fell to his knees, his vision swimming. When the light faded, the leader was unconscious, and the remaining mercenaries were fleeing. The man crawled to the leopard, his heart heavy with grief. The creature's eyes were closed, its breathing shallow. The man placed a hand on its side, feeling the faint rise and fall of its chest. He leaned down, pressing his forehead against the leopard's. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I won't let your sacrifice be in vain." The leopard let out a soft growl, its body relaxing. The man sat there for a long time, holding the creature as its breathing slowed and finally stopped. Tears streamed down his face as he realized the magnitude of what had just happened. The journey wasn't over. But now, he had a new purpose, to honor the leopard's sacrifice and protect the orbs at all costs. The cavern was silent, the only sound the faint drip of water echoing off the walls. The man sat beside the alien leopard, his hand resting on its still body. The orbs lay beside him, their glow dimmed, as if mourning the loss of their guardian. His chest felt heavy, his mind swirling with grief and questions. Why had the leopard sacrificed itself? What was so important about these orbs? And what was he supposed to do now? The man took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus. He couldn't stay here. The mercenaries might return, and he still had no idea what the orbs were truly meant for. He gently closed the leopard's eyes and stood, his legs trembling beneath him. The orbs pulsed faintly as he picked them up, their energy warm against his skin. He looked around the cavern, his eyes falling on the pool of water. It shimmered faintly, its surface reflecting the soft glow of the crystals. Something about it called to him, as if it held answers. He walked over to it, the orbs in his hands glowing brighter with each step. As he reached the edge of the pool, the water began to ripple, though there was no wind. The man knelt, his reflection staring back at him. The orbs' hum grew louder, and the symbols on their surface began to shift and change. He held them over the water, and the surface suddenly lit up, projecting a beam of light into the air. The light formed an image, a starry sky, with a distant planet glowing faintly in the darkness. The man's breath caught in his throat as the image shifted, showing a civilization unlike anything he had ever seen. Towering cities of glass and light, beings with elongated faces and glowing eyes, and a sense of peace and harmony that seemed almost too perfect. Then, the image changed. Darkness spread across the planet, consuming everything in its path. The beings fled, their faces filled with fear. The man's chest tightened as he realized what he was seeing, the destruction of their world. The light shifted again, showing a group of the alien beings standing around a pedestal, their hands raised in prayer. Above them, a massive ship hovered, its sleek design familiar. The man recognized it from the carvings in the earlier cavern. The beings placed 3 orbs on the pedestal, and the ship's light enveloped them. The image faded, and the man was left staring at the still surface of the pool. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what he had seen. The orbs were more than just objects, they were a key, a weapon, or perhaps both. And the leopard, it had been a guardian, sent to protect them. The man stood, his resolve hardening. He couldn't let the leopard's sacrifice be in vain. He had to find out what the orbs were meant to do, and how they could save Earth from the same fate as the alien world. He tucked the orbs into his jacket and began walking toward the far end of the cavern, where a narrow passageway led deeper into the earth. The air grew warmer as he walked, the walls lined with more glowing crystals. The orbs pulsed faintly in his pocket, their energy a constant reminder of the power they held. After what felt like hours, the passageway opened up into a massive chamber. The man's breath caught in his throat as he stepped inside. The chamber was filled with machinery, ancient and futuristic, its surface covered in the same glowing symbols as the orbs. In the center of the room was a pedestal, identical to the one he had seen in the vision. The man approached the pedestal, his heart pounding in his chest. The orbs in his pocket began to glow brighter, their hum growing louder. He pulled them out and held them up, watching as the symbols on their surface shifted and changed. As he placed the orbs on the pedestal, the machinery around him came to life. The room was filled with a low hum, and the air grew thick with energy. The man stepped back, his eyes wide with awe. The orbs began to spin, their light merging into a single beam that shot up into the ceiling. The beam split into 3, each one illuminating a different part of the chamber. The man watched as images began to form in the light, scenes of Earth, its cities and landscapes, its people and animals. Then, the images changed, showing a darkness spreading across the planet, consuming everything in its path. The man's chest tightened as he realized what he was seeing, a warning. The same darkness that had destroyed the alien world was coming for Earth. And the orbs, they were the only thing that could stop it. A voice filled the chamber, deep and resonant, speaking in a language the man couldn't understand. But somehow, he knew what it was saying. The orbs were a weapon, created by the alien race to protect their world. But they had failed, and now, the orbs were Earth's last hope. The man's mind raced. He had to find a way to activate the orbs, to unleash their power before it was too late. But how? The voice continued, its tone urgent. The orbs needed a guardian, someone to wield their power and protect the planet. The man looked down at his hands, his heart pounding. He was just a man, a retired firefighter who had lost everything. But the leopard had chosen him. It had sacrificed itself to protect him, to give him this chance. He couldn't let it down. The voice grew louder, the images in the light shifting faster. The man stepped forward, his resolve hardening. He placed his hands on the orbs, feeling their energy flow through him. The symbols on their surface began to glow brighter, and the hum grew louder. The man closed his eyes, letting the energy fill him. He saw flashes of light, images of stars and planets, and the voice, deep and resonant, speaking in that strange language. Then, the vision cleared, and the man found himself standing in front of the pedestal, the orbs glowing brightly in his hands. The voice spoke one final word, a word that echoed in his mind: protect. The man took a deep breath, his heart steady. He knew what he had to do. The journey wasn't over, it was just beginning. The chamber was alive with energy, the orbs glowing brightly in the man's hands. He could feel their power coursing through him, a steady hum that seemed to resonate with his very soul. The voice's final word, protect, echoed in his mind, filling him with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. But there was no time to reflect. The sound of footsteps echoed through the passageway, growing louder with each passing second. The mercenaries were coming. The man's grip tightened on the orbs, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't let them take the orbs, not now, not after everything he had been through. He glanced around the chamber, his mind racing for a plan. The machinery around him hummed with energy, its surface covered in glowing symbols. He had to use it somehow. The first mercenary burst into the chamber, his weapon trained on the man. The others followed, their faces twisted with determination. The leader stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with greed as he looked at the orbs. "You're out of options," the leader said, his voice cold. "Hand over the orbs, or we'll take them from you." The man stood his ground, his eyes blazing with defiance. "You don't understand what these are. They're not just objects, they're a weapon. And if you take them, you'll doom us all." The leader smirked, taking a step closer. "Nice try. But we're not here to listen to your stories. We're here to finish the job." The man's chest tightened. He knew there was no reasoning with them. He had to act fast. He glanced at the machinery around him, his mind racing. The orbs pulsed faintly in his hands, their energy flowing through him. He had to trust them. The leader raised his weapon, his finger tightening on the trigger. The man slammed the orbs together, and a shockwave of energy erupted from them. The mercenaries were thrown off their feet, their weapons clattering to the ground. The man stumbled back, his vision swimming. When the light faded, the mercenaries were sprawled across the floor, groaning in pain. The leader was the first to recover, his face twisted with rage. He stood shakily, his eyes fixed on the man. "You're going to regret that," the leader snarled, pulling a knife from his belt. The man's heart pounded as the leader lunged at him. He dodged to the side, the blade narrowly missing him. The orbs in his hands pulsed faintly, their energy flowing through him. He could feel their power, but he didn't know how to use it. The leader swung again, and this time, the blade grazed the man's arm. He cried out in pain, stumbling back. The leader smirked, taking a step closer. "You're just a man," the leader said, his voice dripping with malice. "And men die." The man's chest tightened. He knew the leader was right, he was just a man. But he had something the leader didn't. He had the orbs. And he had a purpose. The man took a deep breath and slammed the orbs together again. This time, the energy that erupted from them was even stronger. The leader was thrown back, his body slamming against the wall. The other mercenaries screamed as the energy washed over them, their weapons clattering to the ground. The man fell to his knees, his vision swimming. The orbs glowed dimmed, their energy spent. He looked around the chamber, his heart pounding. The mercenaries were unconscious, their bodies sprawled across the floor. The leader was slumped against the wall, his eyes closed. The man stood shakily, his legs trembling beneath him. He couldn't stay here, the mercenaries would recover soon, and more could be on the way. He had to activate the orbs, to unleash their power before it was too late. He walked over to the pedestal, the orbs glowing faintly in his hands. He placed them on the pedestal, watching as the symbols on their surface shifted and changed. The machinery around him hummed with energy, its surface lighting up with a brilliant glow. The man took a deep breath, his heart steady. He knew what he had to do. He placed his hands on the orbs, feeling their energy flow through him. The symbols on their surface began to glow brighter, and the hum grew louder. The man closed his eyes, letting the energy fill him. He saw flashes of light, images of stars and planets, and the voice, deep and resonant, speaking in that strange language. Then, the vision cleared, and the man found himself standing in front of the pedestal, the orbs glowing brightly in his hands. The voice spoke one final word, a word that echoed in his mind: activate. The man took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. He slammed the orbs together, and a blinding light filled the chamber. The energy that erupted from them was immense, a force so powerful it made the ground shake. The man fell to his knees, his vision swimming. When the light faded, the chamber was silent. The mercenaries were gone, their bodies vanished. The machinery around him hummed with energy, its surface glowing faintly. The man looked down at the orbs, their glow steady and calm. He had done it. He had activated the orbs, unleashing their power to protect Earth. But at what cost? The man stood shakily, his legs trembling beneath him. He looked around the chamber, his heart heavy with grief. The leopard was gone, its sacrifice weighing heavily on his mind. But he knew it hadn't been in vain. The journey wasn't over. But now, he had a new purpose: to honor the leopard's sacrifice and protect the orbs at all costs. The chamber was silent, the only sound the faint hum of the machinery and the steady drip of water echoing off the walls. The man stood in the center of the room, the orbs glowing faintly in his hands. Their light was softer now, their energy spent. He looked down at them, his chest heavy with a mix of relief and sorrow. He had done it. He had activated the orbs and saved Earth from the impending darkness. But the cost had been high. The alien leopard was gone, its sacrifice weighing heavily on his heart. He knelt by the spot where it had fallen, his fingers brushing against the cold stone. The creature had given its life to protect him, to give him the chance to fulfill this mission. He owed it everything. The man took a deep breath, his mind swirling with emotions. He had started this journey as a broken man, haunted by guilt and loss. But now, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years: hope. The leopard had shown him that even in the darkest moments, there was light. And sometimes, that light came from the most unexpected places. He stood and walked over to the pedestal, placing the orbs gently on its surface. They pulsed faintly, their glow steady and calm. The machinery around him hummed softly, its energy a constant reminder of the power they held. The man knew the orbs were safe now, their purpose fulfilled. But he also knew his journey wasn't over. He turned and began walking toward the passageway that led out of the chamber. The air grew cooler as he walked, the walls lined with glowing crystals. His mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead. He had no idea what the future held, but he knew he couldn't go back to the life he had left behind. He had been given a second chance, and he wasn't going to waste it. As he stepped out of the cavern and into the forest, the sunlight hit his face, warm and comforting. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, their leaves rustling softly. The man took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the fresh, crisp air. It felt like a new beginning. He walked through the forest, his steps steady and purposeful. The orbs had shown him a glimpse of the darkness that threatened Earth, but they had also shown him the light, the hope that could overcome it. He knew he had a role to play in protecting that light, in honoring the leopard's sacrifice. After what felt like hours, he reached the edge of the forest. The lake where his journey had begun stretched out before him, its surface calm and still. He walked up to the shore and knelt by the water, his reflection staring back at him. He looked different now, older, wiser, but also lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, smooth stone. He had picked it up in the cavern, a reminder of everything he had been through. He held it in his hand for a moment, feeling its weight. Then, he tossed it into the lake, watching as the ripples spread across the surface. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. He wasn't sure who he was thanking, the leopard, the orbs, or perhaps the universe itself. But the words felt right. He stood and began walking along the shore, his mind clear and focused. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he would find his way. The journey had taught him that even in the face of overwhelming odds, there was always a path forward. And sometimes, that path was lit by the sacrifices of those who came before. As he walked, he thought about the lessons he had learned. The leopard had shown him the importance of courage, of standing up for what was right even when the odds were against him. The orbs had shown him the power of hope, of believing in something greater than himself. And the journey itself had shown him that he was capable of more than he had ever imagined. The man smiled faintly, a sense of peace settling over him. He had been given a second chance, and he wasn't going to waste it. He would honor the leopard's sacrifice by living a life of purpose, by protecting the light that the orbs had shown him. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the lake, the man stopped and looked out at the water. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had also been transformative. He had faced his fears, confronted his past, and emerged stronger on the other side. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything he had been through. But instead of feeling burdened, he felt free. The journey had taught him that even in the darkest moments, there was always hope. And sometimes, that hope came from the most unexpected places. The man turned and began walking again, his steps steady and sure. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew he was ready to face it. The journey wasn't over, it was just beginning. And as he walked into the sunset, the man knew that he would carry the lessons of the journey with him, always. The leopard's sacrifice, the orb's power, and the hope they had given him would guide him forward, lighting the way even in the darkest moments. The journey had taught him that even in the face of overwhelming odds, there was always a path forward. And sometimes, that path was lit by the sacrifices of those who came before.